It's a pleasure to be here, and happy Friday. Hope you're having a good day here. What we'll do here, I think the introductions were already done. We have 30 minutes, so we'll get straight to it. What I wanted to do was briefly describe the mobile first, cloud first phenomenon, right? We're living it. We see it on a daily basis, but I was trying to bring to life what it actually means, and the company that I think personifies this in the consumer space, at least to me, is Uber. If you think about Uber, what they have and the assets they have, it's a mobile app which connects to basically a service in the cloud. Everything else is ephemeral. The drivers are not their employees. They don't own the cars. And yet, if you look at their valuations in the market today, it is astronomical. So it's basically the power of an idea that's brought to market through cloud, and mobile is the face of cloud. That's basically what it is. And while that is happening in the consumer space, and Uber is just one example, there's plenty of companies in that ilk. What we wanted to do was spend more time on the enterprise today and talk about what's happening inside the enterprise around this mobile first, cloud first phenomena. All of us have very different backgrounds. I am coming from the networking industry, Chad from the security space, Suresh from a devices perspective, and Paul, who's been at HP, VMware, and now at Box, as a customer consuming solutions from all of us. So I thought we'd start with Paul first and get his opinion on mobile first, cloud first. You've been living this for a while now. It's not a new phenomenon, as you said. But how do you see it when you look at the space and how you're consuming IT solutions from vendors?
Yeah, sure. Is that on? We're here? Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to add just one more thing to your Uber message there, because it's not just that they don't own cars and they don't own drivers. If you actually look underneath the covers, they don't own the infrastructure, they use Amazon. They don't own messaging, they use Twilio. They don't own maps, they use Google. They don't own payments, they use Braintree. And they don't own emails, they use SendGrid. So they're sort of a great example of sort of the ultimate mashup of these best of breed services. What they really own is the curation of the experience, and then a little sprinkling of some additional things on top. So it actually is it's more than just drivers and cars, and I think that's sort of that world we live in today. It's how do you assemble these best of breed capabilities, these best of breed services, and then how do you differentiate yourself on top? So, but back to your question. So, I think when we say mobile first, cloud first, it's not new. I think that the past 10 years have all been about connecting people. We know the pervasiveness of everybody having mobile devices, and cloud is the dominant paradigm of today. I think that by 2020, on-prem systems will potentially be a fringe activity, maybe tied to things like logistics and manufacturing and complex supply chain that doesn't lend itself to cloud delivery today, or cloud-based service delivery. So when I think about it, I think it's a first order principle. I can say, having worked at a company like HP, that if they started today with a clean sheet, unconstrained view, they would build their IT landscape very, very different, and service landscape very different than that they did. It's not that they don't know what they need to do or why they need to do it. It's how you get there. And I think the challenge we have today, even if you adopt a first order principle of cloud first, mobile first, you now have the challenge of how you get there and thinking that through, because at the same time you still have to run your existing businesses of, you still have to take orders and ship product and recognize revenue. So, being at a company like Box, they were born digital, grew up in the cloud. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the tech debt and sort of legacy operating models and legacy infrastructure that ties you or slows you down, I get the freedom to spend more time focused on the things that differentiate us and adding more value back to the business because of cloud and mobile being key tenets from the start of the company.
And so do you see opportunity in taking those legacy solutions that you've seen in the past and transitioning them over to these new paradigms, or do you see legacy is going to be legacy and it's going to be that way for a while?
Yeah, I think it's you can't, in any sort of stepwise linear way, take systems that were engineered at a particular point in time and architected at a point in time that was a completely different paradigm. You don't stepwise, it's sort of like a chromosome that's missing. You can't go back and put it in. So you really do have to engineer from the ground up the alternative service to be cloud and mobile first delivery. And so I think that is where you start to see companies that are disrupting, like the Ubers and so on, that are disrupting the legacy models because they're not hampered by some of the legacy operating. So the opportunity, I think, to accelerate is really now is not about building. It's much more about leveraging best of breed and assembling and orchestrating and curating the experiences with the best of breed capability. There are over 10,000 cloud-based services that are there today. So there's plenty to choose from to integrate.
So I'll come back to that because I want to ask about young companies that you like more, and all of you should think about that. We'll come back to that at the end. But Chad, I want to talk about security for a second because in a mobile-first, cloud-first world, the transport is all over the internet, fundamentally, right? You're connecting to your network, of course. I sell Wi-Fi. They connect to my Wi-Fi networks, or whosoever's Wi-Fi networks is on-prem. But once you're over the Wi-Fi, you're basically headed over the internet to some service in the cloud. In that world, how do you see the security landscape and the threat landscape evolving? I mean, it's fundamental. If the foundation is not secure, I'm vulnerable, and people still use security as an excuse to not embrace cloud, right? And I see that quite a bit. So what's your take? How do you see that happening?
They gave us one microphone. They want us to do a duet here. Well, I think what you described is exactly right. The attack surface is becoming broader. And the days in which you say, well, if I can just secure my perimeter, everything's going to be fine. And when you start thinking about SaaS applications and public cloud and start thinking about these new devices that are showing up, suddenly your attack surface has gotten a lot broader. And if there's one thing that we've learned in the security business, it's the bad guys are really smart. And so they will look for new vulnerabilities and they'll look for new ways to exploit things. And if you look at kind of the trend in the threat landscape over the last decade or so, we've really evolved from the college kid doing something to burnish his reputation and do something cool to organized crime and nation states that have the expertise, that have the financial wherewithal to do their own primary research. They find zero-day vulnerabilities. They write custom malware. They do social engineering to find kind of a unique way in. And even the things that we in the security landscape have done to try to deal with these zero-day attacks, things like running it in a sandbox, they're now doing things to evade that. So it becomes a game of one-upsmanship. But guess what? A lot of the low-hanging fruit for the bad guys is really around cloud and around mobile. So I'll give you an example. Apple would have us believe that because they control the end-to-end solution in iOS, that this is a fundamentally more secure platform than Windows, and that you need not worry about malware. And clearly it's more difficult to try to corrupt an iOS application than it is anything that you would see on the PC or Mac. But just a couple months ago, we showed a very large-scale example in iOS where they did something that most of us would not think of. The bad guy said, well, every iOS developer has to use Xcode in order to write their iOS applications. And it turns out that if you go outside of North America, the Xcode is a really large package, like 3 gigabytes. If you're in China, you can't get to that quite easily with the bandwidth, so you'll go to some local site and download Xcode. Well, the bad guys got to that. They corrupted it with something called Xcode Ghost, and suddenly dozens of applications had malicious had malware that was embedded in it and had C2 communications to go back and pull down new exploits, et cetera. And we're not talking about narrowly distributed products. We're talking about things like WeChat, hundreds of millions of users. So this is the direction that they're going. How can I exploit iOS and Android? How can I exploit the cloud, whether that's SaaS applications or public cloud? And it's early days on that, but the trend, you can just extrapolate the curve and see where it's going.
Yeah, I think from a security perspective, it's almost now you have to assume the bad guys are going to be there at every layer and figure out ways to actually protect yourself. I've seen distributed denial of service attacks on websites. So if your business is built on delivering a service over the internet, you can't be vulnerable to that. So how do you fortify yourself against that? For example, is another one. And there's ideas there that I've seen in the Valley to protect the websites. We've seen CAPTCHAs to fill in forms and so on, but I think there's next generation ideas coming up in that space too. But as I said, mobile is the face of cloud, and the mobile operating system is a huge surface for attacks. And there's also a huge opportunity, right, in terms of experiences that you can create that really differentiate from the traditional web user interfaces that people are used to on desktops. So, I mean, given you have a window, basically a view of how these operating systems are going to evolve, how do you see the future of these devices evolving over time?
So first, let's talk about the devices that we have in the market today, right? If we take in these modern operating systems like iOS, Android, or Windows, I'm talking about the Windows, new Windows operating system, there are more than 1 billion devices on the smart device itself. And if you look at the desktops, which is like PCs, there are more than 300 million now on Windows 10, and they're targeting to get to 1 billion devices. And if you look at the IoT, that's going to be multiple billion devices that's going to come into the market. So the landscape is very, very huge. And when you talk about the applications, we are talking about more than 3 to 3.5 million applications just between Apple App Store and Google Play. So it's huge. And mobile is the future. Like if you look at the mobile devices, probably you should ask the question what they cannot do rather than what they can do, right? Maybe they cannot cook your food, but they can do anything else that you can think of, right? And so that's an opportunity, and like sometimes you think of like what we can do in the next 4 or 5 years. You can't even imagine like what are the different opportunities that could happen. And if you, for example, if I give you like iPhone 4, you wouldn't use that one. But just 4 years ago, that was a hot device, right? In future, like that, like if you look at the, how this can grow, it's actually unimaginable. Like, what are the things that it can do?
Yeah. So if you let's tease it apart a little bit, right? So if you're in the enterprise, I'm a mobile user. I use my mobile device for email and all these other services, and the services are living in the cloud, and there's a network that connects the two. And let's assume for a second everything is encrypted, right? Which is kind of the direction the world is headed in. If you think about traditional infrastructure, there's a lot of boxes in the middle besides the pipes, besides whether it's Wi-Fi or wired or WAN pipes and DSL and cable and so on. We have load balancers, we have firewalls, we have caches, et cetera, right? I mean, a whole ton of middle boxes that add and augment the context and create a better experience on the overall thing, right? So now that my data center is no longer in my premise, I'm consuming a service. My devices are no longer devices that I give my employees. They just bring their own devices and use that to connect. How do you see, Paul, we'll start with you. How do you see the role of IT evolving, and how do you see these transport, how do you see adding value in the path between the mobile device and the cloud service?
Yeah, so it's a good question because you often get asked that. I think, if you think about from an IT standpoint, especially as an IT professional, we've had to continually reinvent ourselves over and over again. I was a COBOL programmer in 1987, and if I didn't reinvent myself along the way many times over, I wouldn't be here today, right? So constant change is the steady state, and I think that one of the things that I'm seeing today is with the advent of the sort of bring your own services almost into the enterprise, and certainly security does become a big concern. One of the things that I recently sort of adopted, I call it sort of like the Jane Goodall model to IT, and it's sort of watching what's actually going on in the wild. And now there are services like like the Sky Highs and so on that are actually helping to bring intelligence to CIOs and IT leaders about what is actually going on in the enterprise. And
You're talking about CASBs, right?
all sorts of stuff, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
what you really find is that there are a set of, it's like, why should I be the one that's always thinking up what the users need? Why don't I just let the patterns in the data tell me what the users need, right? Or what they're using, and figure out a way to then support and embrace those those services or those capabilities that they're using. And at that point, you bring it into behind your single sign-on. You bring in into two-factor authentication. You look at the security posture of those services, and it clearly, if it's something that doesn't meet a minimum level of security for the asset or the data that's being managed, then you have to look to shut some things down. But in the most part, you're finding that in order for companies to even compete in the cloud with a viable service, they have to be reliable and scalable. They have to have trust, and typically they have a great user experience, which is why they're getting adopted. And if you can't check off the trust part of it, then that's a different path. But at Box, we take a zero trust policy. We do encrypt at rest. We do encrypt in transit. We even allow customers to bring their own encryption keys. I actually just saw a survey that showed out of 10,000 cloud-based services that are available today, 85% encrypt in transit, which is sort of minimum. It's like breathing air and drinking water, right? That's just the cost of entry. 9.4% encrypt at rest. So I don't know if that's a relatively low number or high number. It feels like a low number, but people are saying, oh, that's actually higher than I thought it would be. And then about 1% allow to actually bring your own encryption keys. And I think that, the pendulum is swinging more and more in that direction in order to remove objection and go with, back to your point, no longer are we dealing with perimeter security. We're dealing with, sort of zero trust principles now.
Yeah, so that brings up, you brought up, I still need visibility into what's happening.
Yeah.
Right, even though all this is happening over the internet. And that has a direct sort of counterbalancing force, which is very, very topical today, which is privacy. Right, because the mobile device is now not just a corporate-owned thing. We only, all of us only want to carry one device, and it has both a corporate side and a personal side to it. And I certainly don't want to give any IT guy visibility into my personal side, right? So how do you balance out, maybe we start with you, on what are the tools available, and is there more work needs to be done to enable this privacy mode while giving IT organizations the visibility that they need?
Actually, tools are available today. It's more education that is needed. A lot of users think that, but the moment it's MDM, they think that, oh, it's like Big Brother watching everything that I'm doing. That is not true. These operating systems, they are built from ground up with security in mind, and also the separation from application to application. That means if you're not managing a particular application, you cannot even see what's happening on the application side. So the enterprises have tools today where they can actually separate the personal data and corporate data and only manage the corporate data on these devices. So it's about educating these users and make them understand. Because everybody has the fear that, oh, if my corporate sees my data, what would happen? But the tools are there, and enterprises cannot see your personal data at all. Your pictures, your SMSs, all they are safe. Enterprises cannot even get to those data at all.
Cool. So let me. I think we have a few more minutes here. So I want to open it up. If you guys have questions, feel free to use the mic, and we'll be happy to take any questions from the audience. Otherwise, we'll keep going here, answering our own questions. Yeah, good. Can you go to the mic, please?
It is mainly for Suresh, and I would like to know what do you see in terms of MDM and content management? So how you feel about, does it really sync together, or it has to be separate?
Can you repeat MDM
and content management?
Content management and MDM, right? They can be together. You don't need to have separate systems to manage those things. So MDM is talk about at the device level. That means if I want to create a separation between enterprise data and personal data, I separate that. And MCM is something that comes on top of it, so you can actually have MCM together with MDM.
Other questions? Yeah. There's a mic right behind you, Sherry.
I haven't heard anybody talk at all about hardware on the mobile side, so we provide a mobile-first application, and we're very interested in examining the hardware, both from a connectivity perspective as well as a security perspective. And so since most of the security profile is in the hardware, can you make a comment about that?
You know, often we want to get more information about the device in order to apply the right security policy. So there's a whole set of things that we can know about the user, and that's fine if we say, well, this person is authorized to use this particular application. However, if that person's device has been compromised in some way, we'd like to know about it. If there's not a password being enforced, we'd like to know about it. You know, if there's an application that facilitates sharing, we'd like to know about it. So there's certainly things that you on the device side, or anybody that's kind of profiling that device, can give us more context for applying the right security policy.
Yeah, I think also on the devices front, we're beginning to see more tools to protect the device itself, both at the OS layer and at the hardware layer. TPMs are available now increasingly, so you can use that to store keys in a very strong way. You can use that to encrypt your data and your applications and so on. So I think there's tools over time that will become available on the device itself. And Suresh, maybe you have.
Yeah, TPMs, if you actually, that's the missing piece right now for Android devices. If you have the TPMs and you can keep the keys there, I would say it will become one of the most secure device that you can carry.
Yeah. So I have, from a this is a conference for entrepreneurs. So I have to ask the question of what your favorite startups are, and so we'll start with you.
I have to say first my startup.
You're no longer a startup, man. You're public. You have a ticker symbol. It's done. We're talking about Series A. Or a space, if you want to identify a space that you think is very interesting for you.
Different analytics is going to be really big. So that's a very interesting space.
Analytics? Yeah, that's Paul, you get to see a handful of startups, I'm sure.
We do. It's interesting because, I go back and forth between, companies that are really sort of innovating at the Series A level and companies that are really trying to reinvent themselves. So a company that is not Series A and is not a startup, but I like what they're doing is actually IBM.
Really?
Yeah. So not Series A, a long time since they were Series A. But actually what I like what they're doing specifically with in and around Watson, and it goes back to your analytics point. I think the artificial intelligence to be able to provide intelligent service back to your employees, your customers, and your partners in a very frictionless, seamless way. We're doing some things that are testing some of that out, and we're finding that I think there's a lot of future in the artificial intelligence automated service
I
paradigm
completely
there.
agree. Excellent. Both of them, I totally agree. Chad, bar is high.
Well, I'm not going to name any companies, but just thinking about the spaces that are interesting. As you see more and more enterprise workloads migrating to the public cloud, you have to think about how do I secure things in AWS and Azure. And to some extent, you might replicate exactly what you have in your traditional network, your on-premise data center, but there are some things that are different. And whether that's at the orchestration and management layer or the way that you're inserting the security services, these are all, I think, great entrepreneurial opportunities. Certainly, Palo Alto Networks and all the incumbents are trying to do that as well, but there's an inflection point that we've seen in the last couple of years, and with the sheer number of workloads moving up the public cloud and some of the unique challenges in trying to do things in a very automated fashion in the public cloud, I think that's one really good opportunity. I would echo what these two gentlemen said around analytics applied specifically to security, right? There's a whole set of things that we in Security Vendor Land do to prevent these attacks from happening and detect these attacks, but ultimately bad things will happen. There will be incidents. And I think there's a lot of promise in applying machine learning techniques to this huge data set that's being generated by all the various devices, security applications, Active Directory, et cetera, and doing the correlation and being able to prioritize incidents in a way that hasn't been done yet. And there's a lot of venture money going into these kind of startups right now, so I think that's a promising thing. And then, I think another area that's interesting is around identity management in a world where it's not just access to your on-premise applications, but you're starting to think about the SaaS applications like Box or Concur or Salesforce or what have you. You're thinking about the public cloud. It's
like
not
Okta and others.
things. Yeah, I don't want to name particular companies, but there's Okta and Ping and Centrify and OneLogin, and there's a whole bunch of companies that are thinking about that in a way that the incumbents in identity management have just missed the mark.
I'll bring you back to my favorite ones these days tend to be location-based services. I'll take you back from the cloud into the premises. We operate networks on premises, and one of the untapped opportunities, I think, is the idea of location and what you can do with it from a monetization perspective. I've seen very interesting things. If you've been to Levi Stadium, you can order your food or beverage from your seat, and it'll come to you based on where you are. If you move around, the waiter will track you down and bring you your beer. And they made $1 million in their first season just on that app alone. It's fantastic. Additional revenues for the venue. Another favorite company of mine is a little company called Robin up in Boston. They're bringing the Uber model to conference rooms. The conference room utilization in enterprises is a massive problem. People book conference room, they don't use it. There's zombie conferences all over the place, and yet when you need to really use a room, it's not there. So they basically tilted the problem on the head and said, well, the room is available. Based on where you are, just look for a room and they'll take you to the nearest room. Simple problem, but I think it solves a headache. And that's usually what I gravitate to, is little headaches that you can go solve that then allow you to pivot and become much bigger. So I think my favorite these days is location-based services.
We're using both of those at Box, sensors, proximity sensors, and the Robin check-in. So if anybody's interested in coming by and taking a look how we use it there, we're happy to show people. Yeah,
that's great. Last question.
So my name is Rohit. So I work for a startup. So since there is a lot of data on the cloud and there are a lot of people on the mobile phones accessing the data on their mobile devices, which is stored on their cloud. So we know that there are CDNs trying to get data quicker to their phones. So is there anything else which you guys are trying to do from the cloud perspective, trying to get to the users quicker or faster or more reliably?
This is a very important problem, especially in a global scale. If you're trying to get the content or the application or improving the experience delivered from the cloud to the device. CDNs, as you said, are good for static content, but for dynamic content, usually it's very difficult. You can certainly do things like caching video at the edge, but much more interactive things are much harder to do. And I think it's a pretty interesting area to go look at. There's also issues around operator network structures, right? You wouldn't know this, but if you're sitting here and accessing your phone and going to, let's say the Box website, right, over a cellular network, your traffic ends up in Seattle before it comes back to Palo Alto in the data center or wherever the Box data center is. So I think there's optimization within the network itself that can be done. The thing though is they're controlled by operators, which the scale is huge in terms of what they do. So the pace of change tends to be slower, but innovation definitely is required in that particular area. Thank you very much for your fantastic comments this evening. I appreciate taking half an hour of your time and sharing your wisdom with the panelists, with the attendees here.
Thank you.
Have a great day, guys.